righty. Well, we are in session 14. Up to what? The end of 11, chapter 12 again?
Yep.
All right.
This is where we left off last week, so we'll just pick up here and just scan over it real briefly, just so we can start at a central point here.
Well, God's temple in heaven is a real wonder, I think, to me, at least in the Bible, and it's talked about quite a bit in the Psalms. I was doing my devotions this week out of Psalm 65, and there's a real blessing for those that God calls out and brings into his courts. So the temple in heaven is, of course, a special interest, I think, to God and to his people. There's this Ark of the Covenant there, and the place of our hope. Some think that the temple described in Ezekiel is the heavenly temple. Some think it's the millennial temple. But either way, it's part of our hope as believers. That this is a place where we're going to worship God and come together as his people. It is a place of great power here. There are flashes of lightning, rumbles, peals of thunder, and earthquake, and heavy hail when it is opened. Now you talked a little bit about having our eyes open to what is in heaven.
Yeah, so remember Elijah when he was with his servant, and the servant was afraid, and Elijah said, Lord, open his eyes so that he could see. So Paul says that we see as a shadow right now. And these things are like a shadow to us. Remember that, in fact, I think I have it here in Exodus 25:40, and the Lord told Moses, see that you make them, that's the tabernacle and the articles of the tabernacle, after the pattern for them which is being shown you on the mountain. So he was given a pattern for the tabernacle because it has to look like, I think, and I know Gary does and others, yeah, we do. We think it has to look like what is seen in heaven. Now, we can't see heaven with our physical eyes, but we will be, the Lord, in fact, Paul says we will see or know as we are known. And our eyes will be opened. There's going to be a different sphere that we're going to be able to see. And to think about it, heaven is more real than this is. If you talk about physics, there's atoms in everything. There's layers in everything, the density and all these kinds of things. You know, the realms of time and space and all these kinds of things. So we don't know all that. We can't see all that, but we will. And so the things on earth are shadows, and they're mentioned here in Colossians. The feast and the diet are shadows of things to come. The law is a shadow of things. The Hebrews 8:5 says the temple and the priesthood are shadows of heaven and Christ, if you will, there. And Matthew 6:10, on earth, remember the Lord's praise. The prayer there is to have it done on earth as it is in heaven. There's some people who call the earth evil, the flesh is evil, and yes, the concept of the world and flesh, the lust of the flesh are evil. But remember, God made it very good. And remember, again, and I think I've already mentioned this, that the earth is the footstool of heaven, the footstool of God. It doesn't mean it's the lower, worse quality. It means that it's the lower extension of heaven, or extension of his creation. And in the end of Revelation, heaven and earth is going to be one there. Heaven is going to come down to earth, and it will be one. And so remember, God walked in Eden, and that's the way it's going to be. That typology is going to happen again.
So it's really interesting because, I mean, the temple was a place that people went to for forgiveness and mercy. I mean, people would grab a hold of the horns of the altar, you know, for mercy. But here it's being opened in judgment, and we're having peals of thunder, earthquake, lightning, severe hailstorm.
Right.
So those who have refused God's mercy, the temple to them is here being open for judgment.
Yeah. When you read this, starting in Genesis chapter 5, Revelation chapter 5, when you read the idea of the throne and the lightning and the thunder and the earthquake, that's a theme that goes all the way through Revelation. It's a theme that you can reach back in the Old Testament and find that judgment comes from the throne, and that is from God, okay, himself, okay? So we just need to remember, whenever we see that, what's happening is judgment, like Joe has said.
So in Jeremiah 3:16, and when you have multiplied and been fruitful in the land, in those days declares the Lord, they shall no more say the ark of the covenant of the Lord, it shall not come to mind or be remembered or missed. It shall not be made again. And that's kind of the focus here when the temple is open, and within the temple is seen the ark of this covenant. And the ark of the covenant was the mercy seat, almost the very throne, if you will, the presence of God.
Yeah, and the old covenant, the old ark will not be even remembered anymore. Because it's like, again, at the end of Revelation, we have God is there. Jesus Christ is the Ark of the Covenant. He holds the Shekinah glory. He is the judge. Of course, all judgment will be done away with at the end of the millennium. We don't know exactly what it looks like after that, but it will be interesting to see how that plays out there. So.
And do remember, you didn't get to see this, the Ark of the Covenant. Only the high priest would go in once a year, and if the sins weren't atoned for, he died. So this is almost like a death sentence to open this up so that everybody sees the ark. You know, if you're not saved, if you're not under mercy, this is the presence of God coming out of his temple, and the unsaved will not be able to stand in front of that.
Yeah. You get the pictures of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know, and they weren't supposed to look into the ark, and when they did,
they melted.
They melted.
They melted.
That whole picture there.
Yeah.
So. And there's a verse about that in the scriptures as well.
There is.
So, yeah.
There is indeed.
Yeah. So Revelation 12:1, and a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And didn't this bring some very interesting pictures to us several years ago? Let's talk about this for a little bit, because it's an interesting subject. In Genesis 1:14, remember that the first word for the signs, it means oath, and it's found in Genesis 1:14, and he says that the sun and the moon will be placed in the heavens as signs. These will be signs, and they will be for appointments, appointed feasts. And I remember doing some work on some pictures there where you kind of picture a Swiss watch, the inside of a Swiss watch if you can. If you ever seen something like that, very intricate. It's kind of like that. The heavens, the word Mazzaroth is where we get our word zodiac, is in Job. The Lord made the Mazzaroth. He made the Pleiades. He made these things, the sun and the moon. He named them Yerech and Shemesh. And so he gives them their own names, and they're there for appointed times. So they are there for something. The moon was used for the lunar feast, the lunar calendar for the Jews. The sun is used for the calendar for the Gentiles. Isn't that interesting? And so, so the whole idea here is, you know, when this came up, and I think it was 2015, I'm losing track here, but when this came up, when this thing came up in heaven, and I learned Stellarium, I went up and I tracked all this stuff, and you can see this Mazzaroth, these constellations come across and things line up, and it looks a lot like Genesis 12, a lot like Genesis 12. And so you've got some people saying, well, okay, now, you know, the rapture's coming, and things are really going to go crazy, and the tribulation is going to be very soon afterwards. And then you got other people who go to the other extreme and say, well, this has nothing to do with anything. And I don't believe that, because the Lord specifically says that there are appointments done with the sun and moon. So we don't really know what the significance of this sign was in September 21 through 23. But we do know this. I do know this one thing. It woke a lot of people up. It got a lot of people digging into the scriptures and learning that, hey, we might see some of this interesting stuff. It shouldn't get us strayed from the Bible. It should point us to the things that are coming, and stay within the scripture and try to learn what the Bible says about these things. Most of the sun's signs, most of the heavenly signs are going to happen in the tribulation. Okay, so that should be a significant point there.
So it is a great sign that appears in the heaven, and I don't know how else you would get a sign of a woman clothed in the sun unless it was something like this. I mean, God can do whatever He wants.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously.
The sun, just so you know, the sun, she appeared. When I say she, the constellation appeared. It came up over the horizon, and the sun was right on her shoulder. And then over the next few days, it came down the figure there. And all of these others, Jupiter and Regulus and all these others, the sign of Leo and all that kind of stuff came up, and so you've got this people who do zodiac and all that kind of stuff are going crazy, but the Christians are trying to find out, what is this some kind of meaning or not? But it was very interesting how it appeared. So,
and she had the moon under her feet, a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant, cried out in pain, and about to give birth. Now, this gets really interesting as we go through this sign, and we look at how all these words come out. And we were there talking, and you had a pretty good outline of how this thing was going to roll out.
Yeah. So first of all, just to comment that there's 4 women in Revelation, and Jezebel is in Revelation 2:20. The harlot is in Revelation 17 through 18. Israel is in Revelation 12. She is the woman. We'll talk about her. And the bride is in Revelation 19 and 21.
All right, so Jezebel was in the churches.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
Revelation
yeah,
2.
Right.
She was in one of the churches and was a problem there and a reason for God's judgment on that church. Revelation 17, she's riding Babylon, right?
Yes.
The great Babylon, and they're going to actually overthrow her.
Yeah.
And destroy her, and most believe that's a picture of the false church or the worldly church, and it's just a good example of why you can't love the world, because the world isn't going to love anything that even a wicked thing that claims Christ, they don't want anything to do with Christ in any form.
Yeah.
So that is overthrown, and then we have Revelation here, chapter 12, and that woman will be preserved.
Yeah.
Saved, rescued by God, and then we have the bride coming down at the very end.
Yeah.
So.
Now, in general, in the Bible, the virgin is a good thing. It's a good woman, and the bride is a good thing. So when it mentions women in these kinds of contexts, it doesn't say, okay, now all women are bad. I don't think I need to make this stipulation. But the Bible does use the concept of a woman in religion as a false religion. Okay, the woman put leaven in the bread, that's a picture of, I think it's in Matthew 12 or 13, that's a picture of false religion. Zechariah 5 again, with a woman in the kettle, going to Shinar, that's a picture of false religion. The Queen of Heaven in Jeremiah. So remember that when you come across that, there's that concept, and it picks it up here in Revelation, where there's the bride of God, there's the bride of Christ, and then the womanly false. Remember, Satan wants to counterfeit God in his order, in having his Trinity, in having his woman, and all that kind of stuff as well. Okay, so that's what the harlot is there. So the concept of this woman here now, let's just go back here for a second. A great sign appeared in woman, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and her head a crown of 12 stars. If you don't know your Old Testament, you can't get anywhere with this. This is again why we need to study our Old Testament. All right? In Genesis 37, now Joseph had a dream. Verse 5, in verse 9, then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, behold, I've dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. So he would have been the 12th. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So, in this interlude of Revelation chapter 12, what is happening? John, because of the revelation of Jesus Christ given to him by his Father, is revealing the Old Testament concept of the woman being Israel. The woman is Israel, okay? In Revelation 21, just skip ahead just a little bit and show you that then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, watch, the New Jerusalem coming down out of the heavens from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Then in verse 9, come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great mountain and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming out of heaven, down from God. What's the concept here? That the brides, the two brides of God the Father in the Old Testament, read Hosea, the book of Hosea there, and then the bride of Christ are coming as one, given to the husband, which is God, and the Son there. Okay, so that's what's happening there. We're bringing he's bringing the Old Testament saints and the New Testament saints together there in Revelation. Okay.
All right, another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. So we have this great red dragon as another sign. Most people take the 7 heads as 7 rulers, and the 10 horns as 10 nations, and on his heads the 7 diadems, of course, are the power or authority to rule. The great red dragon is kind of an interesting deal. This tracks all the way through the Bible. Of course, you can go back to the Garden of Eden with the serpent there.
Yeah.
The serpent and the dragon are used almost interchangeably. As a matter of fact, at the end of a Revelation, it will say that old serpent, the dragon. We'll talk about them as one person through the whole thing.
Yeah.
So, what is it about these dragons?
Well, we're going to get into more. We're going to specify who these nations are, who these kings are a little later. We're not going to get too much into that right now. We're going to leave that for another. There's a lot in this chapter already. But just to specify, there's the dragon. Okay, and we'll talk about him in a minute. 7 heads and 10 horns. The 10 horns are 10 nations. Remember, he will subdue 3 kings. So there's 7 heads. There's 7 kings, if you will, and there's 10 nations. Okay, and he's going to subdue 3 of them. Right? And so we'll get to those now. Now watch. Look, he has diadems. Those are diadems. That's it. That's important because that's a heavenly crown. Jesus at the end in Revelation 19 will have many diadems. Okay? So that's a kingly crown. I'll put it that way. A kingly crown, and he has 7 of them, so he's given quite a few. So look here now. In Revelation 6, the writer has a Stefanos. So what I would like to suggest here is that we don't know exactly when the Antichrist is possessed by the devil, but he will be. I believe the world gives the Antichrist, just like Hitler and these others, they give him power, Stalin, they give him power, but at some point the dragon possesses this man, and this man gets diadems at that point. Who gives him the diadems? God. God is giving him authority for 1 hour. Okay? It's called 1 hour. And again, we'll get into more of that as we go. But there's a concept here of this man coming on the scene in Revelation 6 and then becoming demonic, and then he gets the power of Satan and then takes over the world. Okay? Because that's the concept there. Now, the dragon is Satan. And we're going to find out the beast is the Antichrist. And there's actually 2 beasts. There's going to be the beast of the Antichrist and the beast of the false prophet. The beast are men. The dragon is Satan. Okay? Daniel 7. Thus he said, as for the 4th beast, there shall be 4 kingdoms on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and trample it down, and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns out of this kingdom, 10 shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former one, and shall put down 3 kings. Okay? So 7 kings, and one will take over, the little horn will take over three of them. So, let's see, I think there was another question that we had. Well, we'll get into more of the dragon here. He's coming up. More of him's coming up. So go ahead.
Well, more of him's right here. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven, cast them to the earth. Most of the Bible scholars and those I've read believe that this is a reference to him taking a third of the angels, who then become his demons, his minions, if you were, those under his power and control, who oppose God and are creating havoc here on the earth. So the idea here is that he takes a third of the angels with him when he falls.
Yeah. We're coming into a place here where, again, we already talked about Genesis 37 there, where that is history. Okay? And we're still, looks like we're in history here. Okay? But there's going to be history and prophecy beginning to mix here, where things are happening in heaven, and it's a historical context as well as a prophetic context. And so in Luke 10:18, the Lord said, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. And then Isaiah 14:12, how have you fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn? You have been cut down to the ground, O destroyer of nations. Now, Joe and I have talked about this, and we agree that there's this concept that Satan, he's the prince of the power of the air. The dragon rules the air. He is a king of the earth. He rules over the principalities of the earth spiritually. He wants a man on the ground. Okay, but he can still visit heaven now. Job chapter 1, Job chapter 2. He's the accuser of the brethren, which we'll talk about. So he's able to go before God and say, hey, you see what these guys are doing and what he's done and what she's done and all that. So he's the accuser, but at some point, we'll see that there's a war in heaven, and then he can't enter heaven anymore. And that is the heavenly throne room, that is the heavenly courtroom that he can't come into anymore. Okay? So I hope that makes it a little bit clearer. We want to be specific about some things. All right? So go ahead.
Well, so here the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. Now, the Bible is very specific when it uses words, and I really like how Pastor Raymond has kind of parsed this thing out for us. So he's going to bring up the difference here in words, teknon versus hurion, the church versus Christ. One is really interesting. One is going to be harapsod, and it's going to talk about a division in the followers of Christ. Later at the end of the chapter, it's going to talk about those who had been left. So you have a group that's taken up, and you have a group that's left here in this chapter as well.
Yeah, I think, remember, every jot and tittle, everything means something. And if it's not used for something prior, you shouldn't use it for something new. You shouldn't change your ideology. And so the English, our English Bibles need to be written in a little bit so that we can understand what the Hebrew and the Greek says. Okay? So I'm going to try to hammer through this a little bit and show you that in Revelation chapter 12 here, there is a lot going on in history and then in future, back and forth here. And again, it has to do what Joe is saying. The saints that are here, the saints that are dead, the saints that are going to be in the tribulation, and they're parsed out here a little bit. So let's take this a little bit at a time, okay? In chapter 12, verse 4, she bore a child, okay? Who's she? She is Israel, all right? And she bears a teknon, okay? And this dragon is coming to kill this teknon. Now, so Israel is the nation, all right? Now, remember, Revelation is written by John, and so we want to use the context of the verse, and then to help, we can go to John's other writings, and then to the rest of the Bible if we want. But this word teknon means in John, the first use in John is John 1:12, the right to become children of God. So it's a general, neutral term that we're children of God. You can say male child if you want, but it's a general, neutral term for children. Revelation 2, now John uses it in Revelation 2 for the first time. I will strike her children. It's talking about Jezebel's children. So it's just a general concept about children. That's the word teknon, okay? In verse 5, she gave birth to a male child. That's Hurion. One who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Now, we know that that's the Son, Jesus Christ. There's a caveat coming here, but we know that that is the Son. John uses Hurion some 80 times, and always as a select son. A select son, okay? And mostly for Jesus Christ himself, and mostly even then, as the Son of God, okay? However, he uses teknon only 16 times, and it refers to a group of children or a natural son. And a lot of that is neutral. It's not even
masculine.
Yeah, it's not even masculine there, okay? The word teknon, all right? So you see where we're going here. John is using these words, and if we were to be able to parse it in English, we would be able to see it better, but it's in the Greek, and they're just putting male son or children or whatever. The reason this comes up here is because something's going to happen to these kids. And it plays out here in Revelation chapter 12, okay? In Isaiah 66:7, before she was in labor, she gave birth. Okay, who's this woman back in Isaiah? Before she was in pain, she delivered a boy. We want to say this is Israel, and she's going to deliver Jesus, right? But you got to read on. Who has heard of such a thing? Who has seen such a thing? Can a country be born in a day? So who did Israel birth? Basically herself as a nation. All right? She bore a child. She bore Israel. She became a nation. It was born in one day. Okay? So we understand that. All right? It's a little confusing, and yet it's clear in Isaiah chapter 66. So there's a double entendre, which I wanted to look up and made sure I spelled right. Haven't used it in a long time. There's this double usage here going on in Revelation. Exodus 4:22. Say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son. I told you to let my son go so that he may worship me. Hosea 1:7. When Israel was a child, I loved him and out of Egypt I called my son. Now wait a minute. We read the New Testament all the time, and we think, wait a minute, that was used of Jesus. And it is. Matthew 2. So he got up, took the child and his mother by night, and withdrew to Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. This fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. It's used for Israel, who came out of Egypt. It's used for Jesus, who came out of Egypt. And by the way, in Isaiah chapter 11 or 18, check me, it's going to happen again, by the way. Jesus is going to come out of Egypt again. So there's a double use going on there in the Old Testament and New, compared to the Old Testament New, and it shows up again here, okay? So we're going to talk about the harpazo and the raising up of Jesus here in a minute, but I'd like to have Joe take us through this here.
So yeah, Satan's never particularly nice, is he? We've
No.
got a whole list of his malfeasance here. So from the very beginning, Satan in Genesis 3:14, now will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. And we know, of course, that he will crush your head, but you will bruise his heel. Satan's going to try to kill Jesus. But in the death of Jesus, Satan himself will be ultimately defeated.
Yeah.
Genesis 6, we have the Nephilim in Genesis 6. Now, the Nephilim are often described as a race of giants where Satan is trying to use them really to destroy the human race, is the idea here. At least that's the old Jewish idea, is that the idea of trying to corrupt the human race so that God has to destroy it. And of course, then you have the flood. Genesis 16, we have the issue of Abraham and Hagar. And if you know the story, Hagar and Ishmael were mocking Isaac and wanted very much to replace him, and they got sent away. Numbers 24, Balaam was called out to curse Israel. Balak the king wanted to curse them so they could be destroyed, and yet the Spirit of God came on Balaam and they were blessed instead. In Esther, Haman, one of the early attempts at genocide, wanted to utterly, well, there's three of them, basically destroy, kill, and annihilate, I think it was, every Jew, man, woman, and child that had been taken captive in Persia. And of course, we know that God rescued them and actually turned turned the situation around on Haman and on those who were after the Jews. But Satan was definitely working through Haman to destroy all of Israel. Solomon married an Ammonite, which was not a good deal to do. And actually, just to be honest with you, going back to Egypt to marry the daughter of Pharaoh wasn't a very good idea.
No.
As a matter of fact, we could probably pull that out on a bunch of them. But the Ammonites especially were ancient enemies of Israel. And they caused...
And she's the only queen, she's the only wife of Solomon mentioned, and she becomes the queen mother. Okay, she's the only one. She's an Ammonite. It's bad.
It's bad.
Rehoboam's mom.
Yeah, and they set up shrines to the other gods. They are really the reason that God sends the prophet to Solomon and says, God's going to tear this kingdom out of your hand. He'll save you this little corner because it was promised to David, but this really was an attempt to destroy Israel, to divide it.
That's right.
Yeah. Matthew 2:18, Herod tries to kill Jesus. Herod's an interesting character. He had to have been demonic. If you read anything about this guy, he was best friends with Caligula, for heaven's sake. If you read ancient Rome, you know about Caligula. Yeah, these guys were like buds. And it was a bad deal. Herod was very satanic all the way through this. He was one of the last of the known, my understanding, was the last of the known connections to Edom, that nation under curse. Right. Yeah. He was an Idumean. An Idumean who had married into the a lineage of the Maccabees, who were very much honored in Israel, and that's how he kind of got his claim to the throne. He tried to kill Christ, very much like Pharaoh in Egypt did, trying to have him killed as an infant, and then was one there all the way through this thing, was kind of lurking in the shadows. Jesus called him that old fox. You just tell that old fox, I am going to die, and I'll be down for 3 days, but then I'm coming back. Yeah, you tell that old fox. He's going to think he has me, but he doesn't.
Amen.
Yeah. So, Luke 4, you have Satan with the temptation of Jesus, trying to defeat him before he begins his ministry, but Jesus overcomes it. You have the cross. Very, very interesting. Jesus told the crowd of Judas coming out, this is your hour, the hour when darkness reigns. It was an hour given over, as it were, to the shadow realm of Satan to come and to and you see that. You see Satan overcoming the Sanhedrin. You see him working in the crowd. You see him just working through this whole thing, all the way through the story of the cross. And yet Christ triumphs over it. 1 Peter 5:8 is the lion who wants to devour the church. I was told he's a lion on a leash, a roaring lion, going about seeking whom he may devour, but God limits.
Some people say he's got a long leash, though.
He does, yeah. But we are told, to resist the devil, and he will flee.
Right.
So we have that hope there. And so here in Revelation 12, he wants to devour Israel. So he's got got a modus. What do they call that? A modus operandi. He's got a long rap sheet, I guess you would say.
Not very successful though.
Yeah.
It's going to be an easy court case along with him. It'll be a long one, but it's going to be an easy one. Yeah.
He is defeated all the way through here, but he leaves a trail of blood all the way through this whole thing. So yeah. You could say not too successful, but we're waiting in blood coming through these stories.
I mean, just take the flood alone. Everybody was wiped off the planet.
Except for 8.
Except for 8 on the flood. So he did a pretty good job there, but God overcame again. So again, being a little bit specific again, now talking about these children. Verse 4b, but let her child, teknon, but her child was caught up to God and to his throne. So remember, what I'm suggesting is that word teknon is never used for Jesus Christ. And the word hurion is most emphatically. So the teknon here would be, if not the only, one of the only for sure, used if it would meant Jesus Christ. But we have some other information here that suggests that even though so we've got this double entendre happening. We got the woman who bears Israel, the woman bears a child, Jesus Christ, and then the woman, then the dragon tries to destroy this child, Israel, and we would say Jesus Christ. And then the child is caught up. Well, which child is caught up? And again, being very specific using the Greek, because the Greek is a very specific language. The word caught up in here, in Revelation 12, chapter 4, means harpazo. That's the Greek word harpazo, okay? That word is always a violent snatching away, always, okay? Matthew 11:12, from the days of John the Baptist until now the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence, and forceful people lay hold. Lay hold is the word there. They snatch it away. They snatch it away. Matthew 13:19, the evil one comes and snatches. That's the word, snatches what was sown. Here's John's use. Then Jesus, because he knew they were going to come and seize him, snatch him away. And 1 Thessalonians 4:17, then we who are alive, who are left, will be suddenly snatched up. Harpazo. Now, just a reminder, the Latin word is rapture. When people say the word rapture is not in the Bible, depends on what Bible you're using. Because caught up is not in the Bible either. It's in the English Bible. So when you go back to the original language, the word is harpazo. Then you translate it into Latin, you get rapture. You translate it into English, you get caught up or caught up suddenly or something like that. Snatched away. All right? So that's the word. So this child is snatched up. Was Jesus snatched up? The word raised up is analambano, Acts 1:2, until the day he was taken up to heaven. Jesus wasn't snatched up. He was taken up. Acts 1:9. After he had said this, while they were watching, he was lifted up. Now that's another word, but it's while they were watching. You're not going to see a rapture. You're not going to see a violent snatching away. Acts 1:10, while he was going, so they're watching. Acts 1:11, this same Jesus who has been taken up, there's the word again, analambano, from you into heaven will come back. They watched him go. So what child in verse 4 is snatched up? So here's what I'm suggesting. It could mean the church. I'm not saying it is, but the only rapture that happens up until now is the church. The only harpazo that happens. So there's a beginning of this entendre where the Lord is combining Israel, the saints, the church, and we're one with Jesus Christ. That's kind of the concept there. Okay? All right. And we'll reign with him. I'll let you read that.
All right, Psalm 2:9, you shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. This is quoted in there too, that he will rule and reign, rule them with a rod of iron. Guess what? We get to rule and reign with him, so we're going to have a little iron as well, I believe. Revelation 2:26, to the one who overcomes and continues in my work until the end, I will give authority over the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter and shatter them like pottery, just as I have received authority from my Father. And by the way, God really values endurance and perseverance, and we'll see that all the way through Revelation. Those who persevere, God honors, rewards faithfulness and perseverance. And so it is here, one who continues in my work till the end. And then Revelation 19:15, he will rule them with a rod of iron when the kingdom is established here on earth.
So there's always been this order in heaven. Psalm 82, Psalm 89, some other places. There's this wonderful kind of pictures of the courtrooms. God is really kind of the head of the court. He's the judge of the court. But there's heavenly ones there. And there's this order. And I was studying this a little bit this last week about demonology and some of this other stuff. And there's this whole concept that God made these heavenly beings rulers, some of them rulers. And in fact, he calls them gods. Little g, we say little g. It's the same exact word as Elohim. You can look it up in the Bible. Read Psalm 82 and 89. But what he's saying is, I made you an authority. And then, of course, in Jude and 2 Peter, other places, he says, you left your authority. They left. Okay? So they've had this authority, but God has always wanted this rulership, this authority in heaven. And so now he's established mankind, which again will rule with him in some kind of rule and reign authority as we go forward. We don't know exactly what that looks like, but there are some pictures that's helpful for us. Okay?
All right, Revelation 12:6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. So God does provide a refuge, and you have some great examples there of refuge, how God's provision for his people from the Old Testament.
Yeah. So at some point in the future, in the tribulation, here's the general idea. That Satan is ruling on the planet. He's taken his army and he's been marching across probably Europe and into the Middle East. And he's making peace through power, okay? But immediately when he takes power, he is persecuting the saints. Remember that one of the first seals was the martyrs under the throne. They've already been killed. So he is already after us. We won't be there, I don't believe. But he's already after the saints. He's already after Israel. And then so the Lord says, well, like he always has, he's going to protect them. And Genesis 6, Noah's in the ark. Remember, he's a picture, and his 8 are a picture of Israel there. 1 Kings, Elijah is at the brook of Cherith. And then 1 Samuel 24, David and Gedi is just a few examples of God protecting when the army or the enemies are trying to kill them. Okay? He sends his angel to tell Joseph to leave to Egypt. You know, take your son and go to Egypt. Tell them when to come back, and all these kinds of things. So.
Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. At some point, Satan seems to get his wings clipped and be forced to do his work from earth. God seems to take over this, the atmosphere. You'll see in Revelation that people seem to see and hear. I mean, angels will go proclaiming woes. One point, angels go and proclaim the gospel. And people try to hide from the face of the Lamb. So God seems to come in a visual, tangible kind of a way. And Satan is forced and limited a little bit by being forced onto the earth.
Yeah. So Revelation 6, you have this horse. This man is riding. And so now you have a progression of all these things that happen. Wars on the earth. But remember, it's a picture of in heaven. And so when Satan rises up to take over, he says, now I've got my man on the planet. Now I'm going to kill the seed of Christ. This is a good time to say this, that there's some stipulations for Jesus Christ coming back. There were some stipulations for God coming to save his people out of Israel. What was it? They cried out for help. And the same thing is going to happen in the tribulation. They will cry out. Well, if Satan can kill those people, there's nobody crying out. So he wants to kill the seed there. You know, he knows he's lost in heaven, but he's not done with killing the seed. And that's what he wants to do. So you've got this progression of war on earth, some war in heaven now, and now it's going to come to the earth and it's going to get really messy. Daniel chapter 12, at that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people. So now in Daniel, remember, this is a stipulation. He's talking directly to Daniel. He's saying your prince, in other words, Israel's prince, Daniel's prince, and he's the prince of their people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never had been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be written in the book of life.
For a history teacher, that's a very frightening statement. There's a time of trouble such as never been since there was a nation. Yeah, there have been some pretty dark times of trouble, and that just sends a little chill up my back when I think of that.
How many people did you say Stalin killed?
He's given credit for about 65 million, 42 just in the Ukraine. He sealed off the Ukraine and tried to just kill everybody, took all the food out.
Yeah.
So there's a long history of bad blood between him and the Ukrainians, and you see that today.
Yeah.
Um,
So, who's fighting here and who's picking a fight? War arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. Who picked the fight? God picked the fight. He's saying, you're out of heaven, and it's time to progress what's happening on earth. Remember, God is in control. He's undoing all the seals. He's going to have all the trumpets blown. He's sending all the angels. He's pulling all the strings, and it's still God's angel. And remember, he's doing it for redemptive practices as well as judging those who dwell on the earth. Okay?
There is a nice promise here, but at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book.
Yeah.
That's not just Israel there. That's the people whose names are written in the book.
Yeah.
That is, to me, that's the believers.
Yeah, and that's at the end. You know, that's a culmination of everybody who's saved there. So
That's a wonderful promise.
yeah. So let's talk about Michael, and maybe we'll end here. Okay, Michael, Daniel 10:13. He's one of the chief great princes. That's what it says there. He's one of the chief great princes. In Daniel 10:21, Michael, your prince. So the prince of Israel. Okay. Daniel 12:1, he's the protector of Israel. Zechariah 14:3, I don't know what I had there. That was a note that I wanted to delete, I think. Jude 1:9 and 1 Thessalonians 4:16, he's the archangel. He's the only one mentioned as an archangel. Okay? But notice that this is the New Testament, and there's evidence in the Old Testament that, remember, he was beautiful. He was the most beautiful one. He was the wisest one until
You're talking about Satan,
Satan was.
not Michael.
Until pride was found in him. So Satan fell when pride was found in him. So some you can suggest that maybe Satan was the archangel, but Michael took his course. But others would suggest that there's 2 or 3 archangels. Okay. Jude 1:9, he's the one that fought, of course, Satan for the body of Moses. And then Numbers 21:14, therefore it said, in the book of the wars of the Lord, Waheb and Shapha and the valleys of the Arnon. Isn't that an interesting book? I think I mentioned to Sunday's group that I went through and looked at the Qumran scrolls and found out all the other books that were found in Qumran, along with all the scriptures. And many of them have the last wars, the apocryphal wars, and those kind of things. And one of them here is the wars of the Lord. So it's just very interesting. I thought I'd throw that in there.
That is interesting. Yeah, I like that. That's very, very interesting. So there is a book of the wars of the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you wonder if Michael wasn't the guy who slew all those Assyrians that came down. How many was it one night?
Yeah, 185,000.
185,000. That's pretty tough to get 185,000 in one night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When Sennacherib said, I have Hezekiah locked up in a castle like a bird in a cage.
Yeah.
And the Lord said, I'll show you. And he sent one of his angels, just one angel, to go down there and take care of business. So it's an interesting concept.
Figure out how many a second that would be for an 8-hour night.
Yeah, right.
That'd be a lot of people.
One last note, we were talking again in the room there that when God does things, it says by the word of his breath or the word of his mouth, many times it's just giving an order to his angels. Many times it's just going to be giving an order to you. David did the same thing. They conquered by the word of David. Moses did the same thing. They ruled or they were led by the word of Moses. And so just keep that in mind as we continue to go through this.
The centurion was greatly praised by Christ for seeing that, for realizing all you got to do is give the order, and one of your minions is going to go do it.
Yeah.
He understood that, and I think it's important for us to understand too. Sometimes that word might come to us.
Yeah. Amen. Okay, I think that'll do it for tonight. Okay, I'll just
Close in
close
prayer,
with prayer.
huh?
Lord, we're very grateful for your word, Lord, and we love you for it. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to seeing what is coming, what will happen. We are living in the most exciting time in history, I believe, Lord. Your word says that these things are going to come about. There's so much that I think is going to happen according to the scriptures. Even before the tribulation, we'll be able to know that these things are coming. And so we just look forward to it. But along with this, Lord, it's a little scary. It's a little frightening to know what people will go through, maybe some of our friends and family. So we do want to pray for them. We do want to have a heart for those, to rescue as many as we can, to get them into the ark, per se, as we can, and save as many as we can, and we'll snatch them from the fire, as Jude puts it. So help us do that, and we'll worship you and praise you for it, and give you all the glory. And everybody said, Amen.
Oops. Very nice.